Hi, my name is Ruben Zaiotti. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at Dalhousie University in Halifax, and I'm also the director of the European Union Center of Excellence based in Halifax as well. My research interests are related to the European Union, but more particularly in issues related to migration. My ongoing research been around Schengen, so the regime that deals with the policy regime that deals with borders and controls in Europe. Currently I'm working on 3 related research projects that are going to take me for the next few years. So the first one has to do again with migration and refugees, and it's based on the ongoing crisis that it's unfolding in Europe nowadays. But I'm trying to look at this particular situation from a different angle. So what I've been working on until now is mostly from the institutional perspective, understanding how this policy regime has come into being the way it is and what made it possible. So as I said, I'm mostly focusing on the institutional policy perspective. What I want to focus on now instead is the aspects of this phenomenon that are not tightly related to the policy world per se, the official realm of politicians and policies. Instead of looking at the impact of this, the dynamics, these policies on people mostly that are affected by these policies. So what happens at the borders of Europe or beyond when individuals who are trying to get to Europe or just thinking about Europe, and explain in a second why that might be relevant, what their effects on them. But not simply in the way they might be impacted by the policy on the ground, meaning people are trying to cross the Mediterranean or other ports of entry in Europe, but how they imagine their trajectory towards Europe. So what I'm looking at is the more creative aspect of how this individual is trying to make sense of borders, European borders, and through that, issues that have to do with identity, European identity, but also identity of those who are trying to get into Europe. And so I've started to collaborate with people working more on the artistic side of the study of borders. So those who are studying the ways in which both artists but also people in their everyday lives represent borders, mostly through visual representations of borders. In this case, I'm interested in the European perspective. So what happens at, around, and about European borders? How they're seen, perceived, and represented by artists, migrants themselves, and so on. So as I said, I'm trying to move away from just the focus on policymakers. That's one project I'm working on right now. The second one has to do is more traditional, in a sense, as a political scientist, looks at transatlantic relations. So relations between mostly Canada, but US as well, and Europe and European Union more specifically, on issues related to security, but what in Europe is referred to internal security or North American homeland security. So there's a migration component as well attached to this project, but it sort of goes beyond this area. It includes issues about terrorism, crime, and so on. And in particular, what I'm interested in, and I'm working on a collaborative project with a colleague of mine from the University of Dalhousie University, is the role of policy actors, their work across the ocean, so transatlantic policy actors, and how they're generally within governments, so they're transgovernmental policy actors, in the way in which they shape this transatlantic policy field, how or whether there's a convergence in the way governments across the ocean deal with issues related to internal security. The third project has to do with the European Union, again, foreign policy, but again, it takes a different angle from the one that is traditionally taken, or at least the one that I've been taking in the past. So instead of looking at what the European Union does on the world stage, I'm looking at the ways in which the European Union is perceived from those who are interacting with this political entity. So the general field is that of public diplomacy. It's not the traditional foreign policy in terms of military or economic. It's public diplomacy, the ways in which the European Union, if you can use the language, is trying to sell itself to the world. But I'm trying to look at how this marketing exercise actually plays out in the potential audience to which this pitch is addressed to. And again, I'm not trying to look at what other politicians, policymakers are making of the EU efforts to publicize itself, but instead the wider population, in particular those who are engaging with the EU, either because they want to go to Europe. Again, there's a connection with the migration aspect. Some people might want to go to Europe, so they might listen to what the European Union is saying outside Europe, but also other members of civil society, including business people. So these are the three major research areas that I'm working on. Again, mostly all related to the EU. That's my main area of expertise. But I hope that once this is completed, I'll be able to further pursue my interest in those areas, and hopefully some of you are going to read some of the material that I'll produce. Thanks.